and welcome to our first Skype recorded presentation. Obviously, given the current situation with coronavirus and isolation, we've had to come up with something a little bit novel to be able to still do our presentations and our talks. This won't be a continual thing. This is purely to still be able to bring the content to you whilst we can't actually have the physical meetings. It will also give some of those of you who've thought about coming to the meetings an idea of the sorts of presentations that we actually get and the quality of the people that we get doing the talks for us. On the back of that, tonight's presentation is from one of our own committee. We have Lisa Langston doing a talk with us. Lisa's a zookeeper at Rodbaston Animal Zone, and she's doing a talk on the recent lemur introductions which they've been doing there. So I shall now pass you over to Lisa to do that presentation. Thank you very much, and thank you, Lisa. Good luck.
Thank you. So I'm just double check that it's sharing. Okay, so as you can see, it is talk about the lemur introductions that we've been doing at Rodbaston Animal Zone. So for those of you that aren't familiar with lemurs, they're only found in Madagascar and the Comoro Islands. There are 10 species placed in fawn genre. There are a large variation in their diet, so some are frugivores, some are volevorous, and some will consume insects in their diets, and there are specialised feeders who will only consume the leaves of bamboo. All lemurs are at least partially arboreal, but a few spend a considerable amount of time on the ground. And lemurs will move through trees by running along the branches and leaping from vertical stems or trunks. Lemurs can be very social, and they can live in groups of 18 to 20 individuals within one group, and there are a few species who are considered solitary. So our current lemur setup is that we have 9 male ringtail lemurs. They're all entire, they're all half siblings or full siblings. We also have 2 male red-fronted lemurs. They're entire as well. So they've been living together with the ring-tailed lemurs for about 4 years, and their enclosure was adapted to give them more space by February 2019. We also have 2 male black lemurs, one that's vasectomised and one that's castrated, and then 1 female that's entire. Now the current setup, because they inhabit the same indoor enclosure, we split it into 2 areas because originally they were all living together, but there was some difficulty with the dad and his son. So we ended up separating them 2 and giving them 2 separate areas, but only 1 use of outside. And we alternated the female between the 2 males. Unfortunately, after a little while of that happening, the female was attacked by the male, and the decision was made to move her into living with her brother permanently. So she ended up staying with her brother permanent, which meant that there was 1 male that was on his own, he was completely solitary. He had visual access to the others, but he couldn't actually get to them. And we alternated the outside enclosure on an 24-hour basis. So Nod would normally be in there. Normally about 3 or 4 o'clock, we'd swap him over with the other 2. And he'd had from 3-4 o'clock until the following morning, which would have been about 9 o'clock. And we did that every day pretty much. So this is a basic layout of the lemur walkthrough of where we would be housing all 3 different types of lemurs. So you can see at the minute on the diagram on the right hand side, there's the ringtail lemur house, which currently houses the 9 ringtail boys, and then in the middle there is another enclosure which houses the 2 red-fronted lemurs. So the idea would be is that we have altered the outside of the red-fronted enclosure to incorporate a catch area, so they can come out but they don't have the ability to escape the enclosure basically. And then we move the red-fronteds in with the ringtail lemurs just for overnight purposes. So the aim of the introduction was to create a relatively stable mixed bachelor group of ringtail lemurs, red-fronted lemurs and black lemurs. So to give you a little bit more information about how we've done it and why we've done it the way that we have, I'll give you information about the lemurs themselves. So we have 9 ringtail lemurs. They're all entire, and as I've said already, they're a mixture of full siblings and half siblings, and it's a relatively stable group. We have Eddie, who's considered the dominant male. He's also one of the core males, along with Scotty and Percy. Scotty is his sibling, full sibling. He's lower ranking in comparison to Eddie, but still considered core male. We've got Finar, or Finn, because it's much easier to say. He used to be one of the top individuals, one of the core individuals, but now he, as a result of a fight last year, probably around about October time, he is now dropped to be one of the lowest ranking within the group. We have Percy, who is the youngest and the smallest. He's actually come into maturity, and he's made a play for being a core male. So up until this point, he'd always been the kind of male that instigated a lot of issues, so he'd cause a lot of trouble and always be the one, starting a fight. But now he has the backup of Eddie, who is the older and larger male, so his status is elevated significantly. We have Sid. He's a mid-ranking peripheral male. He's very human orientated, but he's fairly stable in terms of personality. There's Caramel, who is a lower ranking male, and unfortunately has been attacked several times when there's little bits of a bit of a tiff going off in the group. He'll be the one that sort of is at the butt of it all. There's Rebel and Lucky. They're quite similar in status. They're mid-ranking peripheral males. And then Lakobe, he's the largest and is the lowest ranking peripheral male, and he's really quite an easygoing. Ringtail lemurs are one of the more wider ranging species. They're famed for their distinctive black and white tails. They live in groups of about 15 to 20 individuals, and it's called a troop. The females stay within the same troop that they're born into, but the males will typically move between troops. They're highly social with complex interactions. It is a hierarchy that's established in their youth through lots of play fighting, and the ringtail lemurs exhibit female philanthropy, and the core of the social group is dominant matriline, which basically means that the females are in charge of the whole hierarchy system. Now, normally that's fine, but in a bachelor group, they obviously don't have the females there to sort it out, so the females tend to sort out any squabbles, any disagreements, and the males have their own separate hierarchy system, but it's always going to be lower than the lowest ranking female of the female group that are in there. But our boys don't have that luxury, so they have to try and figure out all of the squabbles themselves. There are usually 1 to 3 central or high-ranking adult males in a ringtail bachelor group, and ours, as I've already said, are Eddie, Scotty and Percy. Out of those 3, it is Eddie and Percy that are the higher ranking. Scotty's there as a result of being a sibling, but he's also quite a large lemur. Central males usually establish themselves in their prime, and it's estimated between 6 and 9 years of age, which is why there was a change in hierarchy status with Percy. The older males who haven't left their group, they tend to stay relatively stable as a bachelor group. It's just unfortunate that we do have our female red ruff lemurs that are in close proximity. So when they are cycling, it can trigger a reaction in our males. So we have to monitor what's happening at different times of year. And you can normally sort of see 2 or 3 times a year, they'll have a bit of a tiff, but they're fairly stable in terms of getting along with each other. The males that refer to the peripheral groups, it's more to do with spatial proximity as well. So you'll have your core individuals, which they're in the middle. So as they're moving around, they're moving from one foraging area to another. They'll be the core individuals that you find within that group. And then the peripheral males will be the lower ranking individuals that can almost be sacrificed to predator attacks and things like that. So once the group reaches its destination, they'll all rest in those almost identical pattern. So the core males will be central, and then the rest will sort of make up, and they'll be in different stages as you go further out. So the lowest ranking will be on the outside. The group on a whole is relatively stable, like I've already said. There's only been aggressive interactions probably 3 or 4 times in a year. Normally it's related to the cycling females in the next enclosure. By serious injury, I mean anything that would just need a veterinary attention. So slashed ears and cuts to limbs are very, very common, but aren't life-threatening. we also have the red-fronted lemurs. There's two of them, Taz and JJ. They are siblings. Red-fronted lemurs are found within the genus Eulema, and they're a subspecies of a brown lemur. There's also another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 10 subspecies in total, and two of them are the black lemurs and the red-fronted, which is why we really could put them all together. The more familiarity there is with species, and there's no risk of inbreeding because they're all boys, we can put them together because their hierarchy systems are going to be quite similar. Their behaviours, their sort of smaller forms of communication, visual, auditory, olfactory, will all be relatively similar. And the aim was to try and get these guys to bond a little bit. So these guys live in social groups that range from 15 to 18 individuals. The social structure of the red-fronted is fairly flexible. So with the ringtail lemurs, it's quite rigid, it's female orientated, and then the males sort of overlap a little bit with it. But with these guys, it is more flexible. There's not so many aggressive behaviours because they have a central male and it's surrounding the whole thing. So things get sorted out easier. They tend not to squabble as much, and their personalities in general, they are a lot more easier going. Red-fronted lemurs in captivity engage a lot in post-conflict amiable social interactions, which basically means that if they've had an argument or they've all fallen out, they'll spend that time grooming each other as a form of reconciliation, so to make friends after it. So it just strengthens their bonds. So they're less likely to have a tense situation that gathers over a few weeks. They tend to sort of focus, okay, we've had a spat, let's figure it out, let's reinforce this social bond. So Taz and JJ themselves, they've become a lot braver. So when I first started working with them, probably nearly 3 years ago now, they were really, really nervous individuals. They didn't really want to come over. They interacted very minimal with the ringtail lemurs. They just kept to themselves. But since the walkthrough exhibit, they've come out in their personalities. They're quite cheeky, and they don't really show any signs of aggression towards the ringtails or each other, but they will happily back the other species up or each other. And they are relatively calm and easy going. And then we've got our black lemurs. So the reason for wanting to move the black lemurs was mainly a welfare concern, because we didn't really want Nod to be on his own any longer than he needed to be. Now, the initial aim was to build a new area for them down at the bottom of the ringtail lemur paddock. It's still in the processes of being built, but in the short term, we needed to look at ways of trying to alleviate stress for Nod. And one of these was to potentially move him into the ringtail and the red-fronted. He's a very nice older male. He is quite used to humans, so as a walkthrough exhibit, I don't believe he'd be any issues. He's very similar to the red-fronteds in terms of personality and general characteristics. So these guys live in social groups of 4 to 15 individuals. It's a multi-male and multi-female society, but the females are normally dominant. However, in this scenario, we didn't seem to have the female being dominant over the situation. She is a hand-reared twin, and her and her brother didn't really know how to lemur. It sounds very silly, but they hadn't learned key skills as they were being hand-reared. So as a result, a lot of miscommunication was coming across, which is why there was aggressive interactions at certain times, because Nod was behaving like a lemur, but the other two weren't really. So in all honesty, it was going to work out a little bit better for Nod if we were able to move him somewhere else. So the key to any primate introduction is the planning. So part of the planning process was to understand the individual personalities that you have, was to understand the lemurs that you have in terms of what their needs are, how they overlap with their niches, how do their group compositions work, what key information is there that's there that may allow them to cohabit without any issues occurring. So you can never really predict how an introduction is going to go, but you can try and, with the proper planning, you can try and minimise the likelihood of anything going disastrously wrong. So simple issues such as ensuring that there's plenty of food stations, ensuring that you have plenty of things for the animals to do, so the focus isn't just simply on the other animal that's in there. So we took a lot of time with altering the enclosure to make sure that they had plenty of space, that there was suitable areas that were secure for the other animals to go to, but also for Nod to have his own secure area so that he actually felt safe. Ideally, you'd want to try and do an introduction with any primate in a neutral territory, which is what we've been hoping with the new lemur build, which was at the bottom of the paddock. But unfortunately, due to time constraint and the fact that we hadn't had a very good run with the weather and stuff, it was difficult to get that project complete. So we're carrying on with that project with the aim of moving the other two down there over this summer. But in the meantime, again, this is why we wanted to do a short-term change for Nod. So we didn't have this neutral area. So the way that we neutralise the individuals is that you keep them busy. So when you come to introduce them, I'm a big believer in doing more of a soft introduction as opposed to chuck them all in and see what happens. Just because you're giving the animals choice to interact, you're not actually forcing the issue. By forcing the issue, sometimes I believe that they panic and you don't necessarily get the reaction that you should. Given a calmer situation, the animals may respond completely differently. So the idea is that we introduce them gradually to each other. So I started off with the more familiar individual, so the red-fronted, and then we picked key personalities out of the ringtails to introduce. So when we did finally do a group introduction, it wasn't so much of a shock to the system and everybody didn't panic, which is what sometimes happens. So part of the planning process was obviously looking at the personalities, making sure that we understood what was going to be happening, doing enclosure adaptations, making sure that was different routines that were going to be happening, and then sharing the scent of each other between the two enclosures. And one vital part was getting an animal used to going into a crate or a carrier. So it's not a bit blurry because of the eyes of black lemur, so it's not the best to photograph in a dark crate. So we started the whole process by, we'd done all of our preparation and we got a roofs and an external catch area for the red-fronted shed. And we started probably a couple of weeks before we knew that was going to complete by putting this crate into the enclosure where Nod lives at the moment. So he would get used to the scent of that. He would get used to it in general, because most animals don't get caught up unless there's an emergency. So they never really have a positive association with the crate. So putting the crate in, taking the door off, because animals can accidentally shut themselves in there if they're not paying attention, and just feeding him in there. So he was just relaxed. He'd go in there, sit in there and eat his tea. And he'd be really relaxed about it, and it wouldn't be so daunting on the day that we were going to have to move him. And then every other day I would take the box down to the ringtails, put it in their catch area so they could have a sniff. And they can just scent mark it. It was something different, and it was allowing desensitisation to occur. During the same day, so we started on the 22nd of moving them all down. So Nod went into the crate quite easily. I shut the door. He was fine. A little bit of squeaking, but other than that, he was fine. And then we took him down to the red-fronted shed, placed him inside, and decided that we'd already decided we were going to go for the soft introduction with regards to the lemurs. So we left the crate in there so that he could feel there's something that still smelled of him in a completely different shed. We gave him access outside, opened up the front door, and allowed everybody to just come out, because there was no way that they could get to him. And I've never really experienced lemurs where they try and pull fingers through wires and stuff like that. The only animals I've ever known that with is langurs. They're quite aggressive, and spider monkeys. They're also quite mean. So this was the first day. So you can see in top left hand corner, the front door of the enclosure was left open, which is always novel for the lemurs. They go in there and they sense, so they probably would have seen him in there. The red-fronted, this is their area, so they would have gone in and tried to have a sniff round. But if you look in the corner of that photo, you'll see a little black shape just sitting outside. So they all could see him. If you go to the top photo on the right-hand corner, you'll see that ringtails had spotted him and the red-fronted had spotted, and there was no reaction. It was quite positive because it was no reaction. So whenever I do introductions, I don't go for a really positive thing as being the thing I'm aiming for. Neutral is just as good. No reaction. Everybody's just carrying on about their business. That's fine. So we did lots of scatter feeds, and everybody was just out and sunning themselves on top of the roof because that's their normal sunspot. And everybody was just behaving quite normally. Nod was a little bit quieter than he is normally. He's quite a vocal animal in his old enclosure. He kept himself very, very quiet. His movements very small, very minimal. If he didn't have to move, he wouldn't have to move. He was just simply just observing the situation. He wanted to see what would happen, and he sat outside the whole time just watching to see what was happening. And then when we finally came to getting everybody in, it was probably interaction lasted for about 2 hours, and then 30 minutes before they were all separated, Nod decided he was going to try and have a sniff up at the red-fronted. He came up the wire a little bit and had a bit of a sniff, and then went back down. So that was quite nice to see. Everybody was just curious, but then they just decided to get about their business of foraging or sunbathing, which is something that lemurs like to do. And then we got everybody to go into their beds. So the ringtails and the red-fronted were going into the ringtail shed, and then Nod would be staying in the red-fronted enclosure on his own. We put food down on the side for him, and a sign of a fairly content animal is the fact that he was eating. So the next day, so we repeated that every single day up until the 26th. So it was 4 days of just repeating the same process of just allowing Nod access out in and out of his catch area, and then allowing the rest just to go about their business. So they could all visually see him, they could smell him, and they could go up to the wire if they wanted to, but they didn't have to interact if they didn't wish to. So on this day, we decided that the ringtails remained indoors, and we gave the red-fronted and black lemur access to the outside paddock area. So this was Nod's first day of coming out of this area completely. So we wanted a couple of days for him to get used to being in a different area. I didn't want him to come shooting out, panic, and then try and scale an electric fence, because he'd always been in enclosed spaces whilst he'd been with the college. So this would have been his first open top enclosure. So we just needed to make sure that he felt secure and stable within his house, and then we went to opening it up and seeing how we went. He was a little bit uncertain and a bit reluctant to come out, but he came out and had a bit of a look round, and this is when we observed that we don't think he was used to grass. He didn't like the feel. It was almost like a game of hot lava, because he was bouncing across the grass, and every opportunity he'd either sit on something, so we ended up having to leave little bits of wood and everywhere for him, so he'd have something to sit on because he just was really not happy sitting on the grass. So we should have a couple of videos that should play. There we go. So we were having to convince him initially to come out of the house because it was a bit of a daunting thing for a little old lemur. So we were giving him some nice treats so he could come out. Normally he would just jump straight out, but he was just very hesitant, so we had to encourage him by moving him down. And then this one did make me giggle a little bit. It's when he came down and the red-fronted were also eating some scatter, and they noticed each other and, oh, hello, what's that? So you can see Nod looking a bit awkward walking over the grass there. He was not convinced that it was a good thing. So this was part of the same day. Unfortunately, he did go and test out the fence. So we ended up going over to the side of the fence, and he thought, oh, okay, I don't have to touch the ground. He went up a little bit higher and then got a bit of a zap. Since then, he hasn't gone anywhere near that part of the fence. So as horrible as it is, he needed that shock to be able to keep him within there, because if he started to panic and he tried to get through, he probably would have just took the hit off the fence and carried on. So it was good that he had that, so he kind of knows that don't go past that part. So when he came out, like I said, he was playing a game of hot lava, and he didn't want to touch any part of the grass. You kept seeing him licking his feet and lifting them up, and he wasn't keen. So he kept periodically stopping at places So he kept stopping on the concrete area over there. He'd jump over to onto the path, and then he'd go and sit on the tyres because he felt almost like he was blending in. And then the red-fronteds down on the bottom kind of figured out there was something else moving around in their enclosure. So they came over to have a look, and they came over to go a little bit closer to the tyres, and they saw that Nod was there, and there were nothing really happening with the actual interactions or anything. It was all really neutral, but Nod panicked, but then ran towards them to get past them, and they spooked and ran off and then hid in out in a far corner under a tree for the remainder of the time. We stayed in the enclosure mainly because if there was any problems at any point, we were going to have to separate animals off if there was any fights. So it's always good practice just to remain as close as possible, but not too close that you're causing an issue. And then Nod kept alternating between the tyres and where the keepers were to get something to eat. And at one point, because of where Elliot was sitting, he came and sat on Elliot's leg because he wanted to touch the grass. So it was quite sweet to watch. It took about half an hour to get Nod back into the house because he didn't really know where to go, but given the fact that was the first time he'd gone outside, we were really pleased that he was able to get back in. So we did that for a couple more days, and then we introduced when we introduced the red-fronted and Nod were given access to each other, because the house, initially we shut the house off when we first started doing it, just so there was a bigger space and then they couldn't corner each other if they went into the smaller houses. But due to the weather, we just opened up the house so they could all have access. So as soon as we let the red-fronted out and then opened up the red-fronted hatch for the house, they just ran straight in, and they realised that there was somebody else in there because it was quite dark. They didn't see Nod over in the corner until they got in there and sat down. So they both settled. There was a bit of chasing, a bit of vocalisation, but nothing that would indicate any signs of aggression. And yeah, so they at that point Nod came out and he decided to go off exploring. He was a lot braver this time, still not keen on the grass, but he decided he was going to explore the paddock a little bit more, and the red-fronted, because of the weather, stayed inside the house. It then took about 20 minutes just to get Nod in at the end of the day, which was brilliant because he was getting used to that routine. So because we'd had relatively little issues with the lemurs or any interaction or anything like that, we decided to move forward with introducing the ringtail lemurs. So we had Finn, Lakobe and Caramel, and the reason for choosing all of these is because they were the lower ranking. So as I've already said, that Finn was the lowest ranking, Lakobe was also a lower ranking, and Caramel was also lower, but over the course of this we realised that actually Finn wasn't comfortable with having Caramel out. So originally a little bit sad because Finn and Caramel used to get along when Finn was first usurped, and he didn't really have a friend, so Lakobe and Caramel were the two that he was able to sit with and sort of cuddle up with when it was cold. But behaviours were suggesting that Finn wasn't overly comfortable, so we had a couple of things going off at the same time. So Caramel, his status up until this point I thought was still quite low, but apparently it had elevated a little bit, enough for Finn to feel worried about going anywhere near food or going anywhere near the open door of the shed. So after about 30 minutes, because it was quite cold outside, I didn't really want Finn to be forced to stay outside, so I moved Caramel back into the rest of the ringtails, and then got as soon as that happened, Finn and Lakobe and the red-fronteds went into the shed, and Nod was quite happy exploring, so he was being a lot braver, he was being really good. He went round the entire enclosure, across the back, and then also up to the ringtail hatch area. So he was scenting up there, and he was just having a sit and a bit of some scatter that we put out as well. When we went to go and separate everybody off, the red-fronteds and Lakobe went straight back into the ringtail enclosure, completely fine. Finn was hesitating. He didn't seem to be keen at going into the ringtail shed, and he went into the red-fronted shed. So at one point, Nod came over and went into the red-fronted shed, and they kind of just sat looking at each other. They didn't really react. There was no panic or anything like that. There was no negative reaction to it. They just simply just looked at each other. And part of me was kind of hoping that they could stay in the enclosure together so they could just have somebody to cuddle up to. But then Finn decided, no, it's not his house, that's not his routine, so he was going to go back to the ringtails. So we ended up putting him back in with the ringtails. The next interaction was to introduce the red-fronted and nod to one another, but more of an intense sort of area. So we did 10 minutes in the actual house, and it was an interesting one to watch because it was both Taz and JJ that went into the red-fronted house with Nod, and they kind of just sat there and was looking at him a little bit, and this was the video that we got. So he was quite calm, and he just went to have a look to see what was happening, and I was stealing his breakfast, which he wasn't with. And there was another one that was sitting inside, just down in the bottom. So as you can see, there wasn't any tension in him. He was just curious more than anything, but they kept sort of maintaining that social distance between themselves. And because of that, on the back of this, we decided to go ahead with putting all the lemurs together. So we were going to open everything up, open all the hatchways up, and just because it had been so boring in terms of introductions, we just thought actually we'd probably be okay. But the only thing was with this introduction is a lot of talcum powder needs to be used. So I wasn't being horrible with the talcum powder. The aim is to make everybody smell the same. And because lemur hierarchies are based on scent, they can olfaction play a large part of how they maintain their hierarchies. Everybody knows who everybody is through scent. Everybody knows who everybody is and then what level of the hierarchy they're at. But if you suddenly remove that away and everybody smells the same, there's no issue there. They don't realise that there's another animal that's been snuck in, and it works incredibly well with lots and lots of lemur introductions that I've done over the years. So it took probably about 20 minutes getting this all prepared, and yep, Nod looks like he is a skunk, and he came out straight away. And unfortunately, the bottom left was a bit of a calamity because I thought I was talcum powdering the back. The animal spun round and I got caramel in the face, and I don't think he's forgiven me for it. So everybody came out, they were all covered in talc, so they spent more time grooming each other and foraging. So if they're busy doing those kinds of activities, they are not likely to be concentrating on the new animal that has popped up in their enclosure. So we're hoping with this gradual, slow process, the fact everybody smells the same and they're busy, you can get the animal in there without it being unnoticed. So we stayed in there for probably about 15-20 minutes, and because we didn't see any negative reactions, as you can see in the middle photo, everybody was just out sunning themselves, either foraging, sunning or grooming. And then what was quite nice before I went out of the enclosure was that on the right hand side there's a photo of Nod on his little platform, and then Finn is quite close to him and he's sunbathing, so relaxed behaviour that looked really, it was quite nice actually to see. So we made the decision to move outside of the enclosure, but make sure that we had everything ready just in case we needed to go back in and intervene at any point. But up until that point, everything was, like I keep saying, quite boring, and nothing was really happening. So we did that for a couple of days, just letting them back out, and this day was the day that they were left unsupervised. Quite proud of them all, so we brought them all out. I sat outside for probably an hour, just monitoring everybody first thing in the morning. I went and fetched lots of scatters throughout the day, but periodically made a point of not hanging around, and I would go off. By not hanging around, I mean they can't see me. I was hiding in the yard, peering over a wall to see what was happening. And I didn't see anything that would cause me any concerns. They were just busy foraging, or they were busy sunbathing, or just grooming each other, just normal lemur stuff. which was really, really positive. So where do we go from here? We pretty much are going to be monitoring it constantly, because as with any introduction, just because this looked fairly straightforward and easy doesn't mean to say that it's going to stay like this. Unfortunately, with a lot of primates, when you do introductions, it looks okay to begin with. They seem to each other, but then something can trigger it from the environment, can trigger a reaction, and everybody starts kicking off, and they tend to go for the lowest ranking, which, if Nod doesn't have any support or any friends in the group, he tends not to, he'll be the focus of their attention, a bit like Finn, which is why I'm kind of fingers crossed, is that I would like to see Nod and Finn, and then the red-fronteds being able to inhabit overnight the red-fronted shed, and then the other ones, the ringtails, 8 ringtails, being able to stay in their shed. This is mainly because it's just, I think it would be nice for them. I think if they could have a little friend to sit with, so they don't seem so lonely, and they can get more benefit from it for their mental well-being. So as I said, we're going to continue to monitor. We just let them out as normal. This is their new routine now. Everybody knows where they need to do, and eventually we'll start the process of seeing how they get on, being shut in together for an hour or so during the day, and then sort of prolong that throughout the day to see how they get on. If they appear to be okay, they've got access inside and out. The weather's getting nicer, so we will end up being able to shut him in with somebody else so he has companionship overnight. But yeah, so in terms of lemur introduction, it has been really, really positive. I'm really, really proud of all the lemurs and the team. But if you have any questions, feel free either to contact one of the team or myself directly. So that's it from me. Thank you. Over to Matt now.
Hi, Lisa.
Hello, just transferring you back. There you go. Stop sharing.
That was a fantastic talk. Really, we all know how hard you've worked on this project, to be honest. From when you went to do the day down in London, and we've seen how hard you've worked. So it's been good to listen to, and hopefully there'll be a part 2 to this. That when we're out of this virtual situation, we can then progress further. To everybody that's listened, I mean, I think what we'll do is we'll get this out, we'll get it posted, and we'll tag you in it, Lisa. So if anybody has the questions, they can ask you the questions directly, and then you can answer them via the page. But as I say, that was absolutely wonderful. For our first virtual talk, absolutely nailed it. And look forward to seeing this and the part 2, seeing the part 2 live.
I really want, it sounds really sad, but I really do want Finn and Nod to be best mates. Just be nice. Just seeing how much Finn had been picked on over the last year, for him to just have a little snuggle buddy, which would be nice.
To be honest, anybody wants to go down to Rodbaston Animal Zone, speak to Lisa or Elliot and get them to do you an experience day with the lemurs, because they are incredible. More lemurs to have the experience with now as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially Nod.
Yeah. No, thank you, Lisa. And usually I ask for a big round of applause, so the best we can do virtually, sorry.